Hi everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today I have some fun cards to share with you where I made 2 panels, but I made them out to be 4 cards. This video is part of a hop with a bunch of different YouTube artists. We are all sharing our favorite fall color combinations. Be sure to hop along with everyone. Be inspired. The next step along the way is going to be listed down in the description box below. First thing. So I am lucky. I already have a Pinterest board dedicated to color combinations. So I just opened up my Pinterest on my phone and then I scroll through my color combinations. You can follow my board if you want to. I will leave a link down to it in the description box below. Now I just keep scrolling, and once I find a color combination I like, I go ahead and select it, take my phone into my craft room, grab my ink swatches, and match those colors to the inks that I have. I had 4 Catherine Pooler inks that matched those ink colors, so I chose Mandarin Spice, Shea Butter, Eucalyptus, and Twilight. Now, like I said, I have all of my inks swatched, so this makes the color combination thing really easy for me. I did not want to swatch my inks. I hesitated for years to do it, but I'm so glad I finally did it. It seriously helps so much, and I've used them more than I use really anything else in my craft room at this point. So for my first panel, I'm going to go ahead and create kind of a leaf background here. Now, these are skeleton leaves, and they are from Cracker Box and Susie Stamps. I laid them over an A2 size panel, and I was inspired by a photo I took this past summer of my leaves on my tree. Japanese beetles were horrible this year. They ate all of my leaves on my trees and in my garden. So this is what most of my leaves look like this summer, just the skeleton of the leaf. So I filled in that entire background with those skeleton leaves in Twilight ink. I did a double stamping, and I'm using my Misty for this. I'm using my larger one. I need that extra space. So once I had those done, I went ahead and created some masks. I created 3 masks for each leaf, and I'm just going to place those over. Now, I do not use regular masking paper. I actually use a label paper that is from Amazon. It comes in 8.5 by 11 sheets. It's much cheaper, but the thing that I love the most about it is it sticks so much better. So I like to put it to my shirt a few times and then put it down. Now I want to create a plaid background behind this, so I'm using the Waffle Flower Plaid Play stamp set. It's got some really great solid lines in it of all different sizes, and it also has some stripes in there as well. So to start off my plaid background, I'm going to go ahead and stamp the long way with the largest stamp that I'm using. This isn't the largest in the set, it's just the largest one that I will be using in my background. I always like to start with the largest to make sure I have enough space for everything. So once I get that lined up, I'm using the grid of my Misty to line that up properly. I'll go ahead and ink it up with the first ink that I'm using. I am going to start off with the largest, and that largest stamp is always going to be stamped with Shea Butter ink. I will be doing a double stamping on these first couple of stamps that I do, just to get a darker color than one layer gives me. So I'll go ahead and double stamp each one of these. Now, as I was doing this first panel, I thought, you know what? I am going to be lining this up so many times. Why not just create a couple panels? Now, on my second panel, I just grabbed an A2 size panel, didn't add any stamping to the background. I'm just going to create a plaid background, and I'll use this on 2 more cards as well. So I'm ending up with 2 different panels, just with 1 inking of stamp, and then I can go ahead and create 4 different cards with this. You could get even more if you wanted to cut it down even more, but I'm going to get 4 cards out of this. Now this would be super easy also to just keep switching out panels and re-inking stamps. So you could easily get a set of cards with this plaid stamping technique with your Misty, and it wouldn't take hardly any time at all. If you're going to be lining up these stamps, you might as well. Now I went ahead and continued to stamp that larger stamp all the way down the same width apart. So I did about 1 inch apart on these. I just eyeball it. I don't do anything crazy to get an exact measurement here. You can if you want, but I'm going for a not perfect look here. Once I get to that last stripe, even if it's just the tiniest little sliver that's going to be on that cardstock, I still stamp it. If you cut out pattern paper, you always end up with little slivers of images on the edges. You do not want to miss that edge and then it totally looks off forever. Just go ahead and stamp even the tiniest little piece on there, and it is what it is. Now, once I have them all stamped the long way, I'm going to go ahead and turn this to the short way, so 90 degrees, and start stamping all the way down the cardstock this way now. And again, each time I stamp, I'm not only stamping on that leaf background, I'm also stamping on just the plain plaid stamping background. Once I have all of my shea butter lines on, it's time to move to a new line. I'm going a little bit smaller here, and I'm using Mandarin spicing for this. Now for this, I'm going to center it in between two of the yellow stripes. I'm going long ways now. And then I'll go ahead and ink this up. Again, I'm going to do a double stamping just to get a really nice, dark, solid line. Now, Catherine Pooler inks can look a little splotchy when you stamp them at first. However, the nature of these inks are dye inks. They soak into the paper and they will level out as they sit. Now, because I'm using my Misty, and I did use it beforehand on each one of my shea butter inkings, it's going to line up perfectly on both panels. So you can continue just to swap out panels until you get a nice card set, or however many you want to do here, and it's not going to alter the finished look at all. Everything's going to line up perfectly on each one. So once I get those stamped across all the way, it's time to turn it 90 degrees and stamp in between each one of the shea butter, the short ones now, if that makes sense. I hope I'm making sense when I try and explain this. It's much better to show than it is for me to try to explain with words. So I continued to stamp all the way up the cardstock until I got each one of my inkings in between the shea butter that I had previously stamped. Now, I'm going to go to the shortest or the thinnest little stripe in the set. And because this is so thin and I'm going to be stamping so many, I am actually going to move to an acrylic black for this. To help get the best impression, I'm stamping on a foam pad. This is just fun foam. I use a thicker kind that I get from Hallmark Scrapbook. I will also leave some links to some thicker pieces on Amazon, and I just put a piece of computer paper over that to catch the extra ink. If you do not put a piece of computer paper to catch the extra ink, your ink will start to absorb into that foam pad, and it will get everywhere. It won't dry. It's going to kind of act like a stamp would or an ink pad would. So it will get everywhere. So just add that extra layer of scrap paper over the top and then stamp on that. Now for this last stamp, I'll be stamping in between each Mandarin spice and shea butter. So you're going to get double the amount of stamps, but it's a super thin line, so the green doesn't overtake this pattern at all. I'm using eucalyptus for this, and again, I'm just going to stamp all the way across one way, rotate my paper 90 degrees, and do it the other way. Now I went ahead and did my entire leaf background first, and then I moved on and did the entire plaid background next. Now if you wanted to and you wanted to be really particular, you could use your Misty for this. I just didn't feel like lining this up in my Misty each and every time, and it's such a thin line, it stamps really well. You don't need a ton of pressure to do it. So again, I'm going to go ahead and switch out to my regular plaid background here without any leaves on it, and I will just do a quick stamping in between each one of the lines, going the long way and then rotate it 90 degrees and do the short way until I end up with two really fun plaid panels. Now before I take off my mask on this first one, I want to go ahead and add a little ink blending to the edges to distress it a little bit. I grabbed that Twilight ink that I started stamping with, and I'm using a jumbo sponge dauber just to quickly sponge those edges. This is going to give a nice look to that background, not only distressing it, but it's going to help those leaves pop out. I did try and take one of these masks off without the ink blending, and the leaves just kind of fell into the background. With that little bit of ink blending, it helps them pop a little bit more. Now it's time to take up the masks. These stick really well. They're not going to tear your paper at all, but they do stick fairly well. But if you get any pieces that don't want to come up or they're really little, like those little stems on the leaves, I just use an adhesive eraser and scrape that up. Super easy to do. They all come up easily. You just have to give it a little bit of a tug, but it's not going to tear your paper. There is a closer look at that background. I absolutely love this one. It is my favorite by far. I love the leaves in the background. I think it's gorgeous. So I wanted to get 2 cards out of it. What I'm going to do is cut it up. I love to do this on the backgrounds that I spend a lot of time on and get more than 1 card out of. So I'm going to go ahead and take that panel. I cut off about 3 inches at the top. Then I'm going to cut out 3/4 of an inch, which is what I needed for the space for my sentiment. So I measured the sentiment that I was going to use and made sure I cut enough out of the center to go ahead and stamp that sentiment right in there. Now, in order to get this placed right on the card base, I'm going to line up the card base in my Mini Misty here, put both panels on the top and bottom, and then lay my sentiment inside the opening. This is going to give me perfect placement, no guesswork involved, no pencil marks, nothing like that. It just really helps. If you don't have a Misty, just use a little bit of repositionable tape on the back of those and place them over the card base, or you can just tape them in place with a little bit of painter's tape as well. I went ahead and stamped that sentiment with the Twilight ink, and I popped up both panels with a little bit of foam adhesive for a little bit of dimension, and that finished off the first card. But I still had that little strip in the center that I cut out, and I didn't want to waste it. Most of the time I would say, oh, I'll put it off to the side and save it and use it on another card. Sometimes I do, sometimes I forget about it. This time I wanted to show you what I made with that extra little piece. So I glued it down, glued a little bit of a gray cardstock underneath it, and added an embossed panel of craft underneath that. Stamped a quick thank you on the top, and that was it. Super duper simple. I used eucalyptus ink, craft cardstock, gray, all to fit with that color combination on the pattern paper that I made myself. So there I had 2 cards that were super simple. Especially after I put so much work into the backgrounds, I really wanted to get use out of every single piece. Now my second background, what I did was I went ahead and cut it with a circle die cut. Now I chose the size based on what stamps I was going to stamp inside that opening, and I die cut it offset on the right hand side. Now I line that up in my Misty just like I did before and stamped that pumpkin and the blessing stamp set with icing on the cake ink because I wanted to do a little bit of coloring with this. I'm not going to show you the coloring. I will put it over on my Instagram. That link will be down in the description box below. You'll also see another coloring video over there as well. But there is a closer look at that pumpkin all colored up. I used colored pencils on that. Then once that was done, all that was left to do was pop up that main piece that I die cut, that plaid cardstock that I made, and just place it down onto the card base. I used that dimensional adhesive just to give it a little bit more interest and pop it away from that colored piece. Gives a little bit of a shadow, really draws the eye to that pumpkin that I've colored in. Now on this one, I had a little bit more to play around with that extra piece that I cut out, and it was quite large, so I really did not want to let it go to waste. So what I decided to do was, first of all, I'm going to add a little bit of stenciling to the background. I want to make sure that it's a little bit larger than my circle there, so I've got it off to the side so I can continue to bring that back over and just check that I've ink blended enough. I'm using a cake and cookie stencil actually from the Crafters Workshop. This is a food grade safe plastic that you can use on cake and cookies. I don't do a whole lot of baking, and if it is baking, it's not a decorating baking really. So I use these in my craft room. Once they are in your craft room, they need to stay in your craft room. You don't want to take them back into the kitchen once you've had pastes and mediums and inks and all that through it. But that's okay for me. I am fine with that. I added some Twilight ink through that stencil though, very, very gently, and just kind of built it up. I want it to fade off into the white around the edges. Once I had that done, I'm going to go ahead and stamp my image that I'll be coloring. This is again from Cracker Box and Susie Stamps. All these stamps are. And again, the coloring of this image will be over on my Instagram, link down in the description box below. I use colored pencils for this as well. It's my favorite thing to color with. Now I fussy cut that out, and then I'll just use a gray marker, since I used a gray ink to stamp it with, to go around those cut edges. So whatever color stamp you use, or whatever color of ink you use to stamp, go ahead and use that same color marker to go around your cut edges, just to give it a nice finished look. Now once that was done, all that was left to do was to add my little sentiment. Again, I'm placing that circle where I know I want it to end up on the card, just so I don't do any major stamping that I can't undo with my sentiment, and then you won't be able to see it. I'll have to start all over. Now I popped that circle up, popped the coffee cup on top of that, and added a few jewels from Cat Scrappiness to finish off this card. Super simple, but I really wanted to make sure that I used that very large circle that I had cut out before from my first card. So there is a closer look at both of those cards. Both pieces used every single inch of that pattern paper that I made. And here's a final look at all 4 cards. I hope I've inspired you to make some of your own backgrounds and to use every single piece of them, because it is so worth it. That is going to do it for me today. Be sure to head down to the description box. There's a ton of information down there, but there's also the link to the next stop on the blog hop. If you enjoyed this video or my content, be sure to subscribe as well. Thanks for watching, and happy crafting, everyone.